You won't want to miss this. Before we jump in, hit subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment. Trust me, you'll be glad you did. Dr. Callan Rowe adjusted the microscope's focus for the 100th time that night. His eyes burned from hours of staring at shifting cellular structures, his back ached from leaning over the lab bench, and his mind teetered on the edge of exhaustion. The lab hummed around him, the steady beeping of machines marking the passage of time. The air filtration system whispered overhead, circulating crisp, sterile air. The occasional murmur of his colleagues broke the silence, other researchers, just as buried in their work, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of monitors and analysis equipment. Another late night at Alio's Research Institute. Another failed test. He sighed and leaned back, rubbing his temples. Any progress? The voice cut through the silence like a scalpel, sharp and precise. Dr. Ivana Keen stood at his shoulder, arms crossed. Her lab coat was as crisp as ever, not a single wrinkle betraying fatigue, even though Callan knew she'd been here just as long as he had. He straightened, pushing down the instinctive tension that came with her presence. The protein degradation is still occurring at 14% higher than projected. I'll recalibrate and run it again tomorrow. Ivana exhaled sharply, shaking her head. We don't have the luxury of time, Rowe. Run it again tonight. He fought the urge to groan. This was his life now, running the same tests over and over again, recording incremental failures, adjusting variables, and starting again. Alio's research was cutting edge, but breakthroughs were agonizingly slow. Still, he knew better than to argue. Understood. She nodded once, already shifting her attention to the next researcher, the next problem, the next demand. Callan turned back to the microscope, but the cells swam before his tired eyes. He rubbed them, then glanced at the clock. Midnight. He needed sleep. He powered down his station, packed up his notes, and slung his messenger bag over his shoulder. The lab felt oddly empty as he made his way toward the exit, though he knew there were at least a dozen other researchers still working late into the night. Outside, the city greeted him with a blast of cold air. Early autumn had settled over Chicago, and the wind carried a bite of the winter to come. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets and started walking, his apartment building looming ahead, a steel and glass monolith indistinguishable from half the structures in the city. As he neared the entrance, he noticed someone standing just beyond the glow of a street lamp. A figure stepped forward, and for a moment, his exhausted brain struggled to place her. Then recognition clicked. Keris Vale. She had moved into the unit across from his 3 weeks ago, and in that short time, she had become an anomaly in his otherwise regimented life. He saw her in passing, exchanged pleasantries in the hallway, but something about her had always struck him as off. Not in a way that set off alarm bells, just enough to make his subconscious take notice. Tonight, in the glow of the street lamp, she looked almost ethereal. Her dark hair cascaded over the shoulders of a burgundy jacket, her features sharp yet perfectly symmetrical. Too symmetrical. Callan Rowe, she said, her voice smooth, confident. A statement, not a question. Keris, he replied, masking his surprise. What are you doing out this late? She held up a small bag. Coffee. I was picking up a new blend for tomorrow. His brow furrowed. From where? The coffee shop closed an hour ago. She smiled slightly, as if amused by his observation. I know the owner. Special arrangement. Something about the way she said it sent a small shiver down his spine. She tilted her head. And you? Another long night in the lab. He exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Science waits for no one. The words felt automatic, and he regretted them immediately. Keris laughed. Neither does good coffee. There was something about her laugh, precise, measured. Like every note had been calibrated. She lifted the bag slightly. I was about to make a cup. Would you like to join me? Callan hesitated. There was no reason to say no. He had no plans, and he was wired from hours in the lab. And yet, something about her made him cautious. Still, against his better judgment, he found himself saying, maybe tomorrow. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. Disappointment? No. Something else. Tomorrow, then, she said smoothly. I'll hold you to it. He nodded, stepping past her into the building. As he rode the elevator up, he caught his reflection in the mirrored walls. Unshaven. Dark circles under his eyes. Just another exhausted scientist lost in his work. But Keris was flawless. And that was precisely the problem. Inside his apartment, he tossed his bag onto the couch and collapsed into a chair. He should sleep. His body needed sleep. But his mind kept circling back to Keris. She was friendly, sure, polite, but something about her interactions always felt rehearsed. Like she was mirroring the expected responses rather than genuinely engaging. The way she spoke, the way she held herself, it was all too perfect. And then there were the details. She never seemed tired, never distracted, never flustered. She had an uncanny ability to recall entire conversations verbatim. He had once mentioned a niche genetics paper he read in passing, and the next day, she quoted entire passages from it, word for word. And now, the coffee shop. She said she knew the owner, but Callan had been going there for years. He knew the owners, the staff, the hours. They didn't do special arrangements. Something wasn't adding up. His phone buzzed. A message from Theo Marsh, his closest, and possibly only, friend at Alios. Theo, still alive, or did Keen finally grind you into dust? Callan, barely. Another protein degradation failure. She made me stay late. Theo, drink? Callan, too tired. Tomorrow? A pause. Then, Theo, you've been saying that a lot lately. Callan frowned. He almost typed out a response, something dismissive, but stopped himself. Theo wasn't wrong. Lately, his life had become a cycle of tomorrow. Tomorrow, he'd get a full night's sleep. Tomorrow, the experiment would finally yield results. Tomorrow, he'd figure out what it was about Keris that bothered him. But he knew deep down that tomorrow would come and go, and nothing would change. He sighed, tossing his phone onto the table. He should let it go. Keris was just a neighbor. A strange one, maybe, but not his problem. And yet, something deep in his gut told him he was wrong. Something about her wasn't right. And he was going to figure out what. Even if it meant breaking the routine that had kept him safe for so long. At that very moment, in a high-rise across the city, Keris Vale stood before a wall-sized screen displaying Callan's profile. Age, 32. Profession, biomedical researcher. Current project, advanced genetic sequencing. Threat level, undetermined. Behind her, a holographic projection flickered to life. A voice, calm, authoritative, filled the room. His growing suspicious. Keris clasped her hands behind her back. His inquisitive, but manageable. For now, the voice said. But if he digs too deep, I'll handle it. A pause. See that you do. As the screen powered down, Keris turned toward the window, gazing out at the city below. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow, everything would change. You're obsessed, Theo Marsh said, sliding his lunch tray beside Callan's in the Alios Research Institute cafeteria. Callan barely looked up from his barely touched salad. I'm observant. Theo snorted, unwrapping his sandwich. No, you're paranoid. There's a difference. Callan rubbed his temple. He hadn't slept well last night. Even after leaving Keris at the entrance to their building, his mind had refused to shut down. The strange way she moved, the unnatural precision of her speech, the too perfect recall. It was all adding up to something he couldn't quite put his finger on. She's suspicious, Callan muttered, stabbing at a piece of lettuce. Theo rolled his eyes. Because she's beautiful? Intelligent? Interested in talking to you? God forbid a woman be into science and also have good hair. Callan shot him a look. It's not just that. Theo took a bite of his sandwich and waved a hand, gesturing for him to continue. Callan leaned in slightly. Last week, I mentioned a niche genetics paper. The next day, she quoted entire passages from it. Verbatim. Theo shrugged. Photographic memory. That paper was in an obscure journal. Circulation of maybe 1,000, tops. The odds of her randomly reading the same thing in the same time frame. Callan shook his head. That's not normal. Theo smirked. You scientists love to think you're the only ones reading obscure journals. Callan ignored the jab. It's not just that. When I use idioms, she takes them literally. I said it was raining cats and dogs, and she actually looked outside, like she expected to see animals falling from the sky. Theo arched an eyebrow. Maybe English isn't her first language. She has no accent. None. And yesterday, when I accidentally brushed her hand while passing the mail, she reacted like I'd shocked her. Theo swallowed his bite of sandwich, his expression neutral. Okay, that one's weird. Right. Theo sighed, putting down his sandwich. Callan, let's assume for a second that Keris is weird. What's your best-case scenario here? You play detective, figure out she's secretly in witness protection or something. Worst case, you sound insane and scare off the first interesting woman to talk to you in months. Callan exhaled. I don't know, Theo. Something about her just doesn't add up. Theo grinned. Maybe she's a Russian spy. Or an AI. Or, he wiggled his fingers, an alien. Callan gave him a flat look. Hilarious. Look, here's a crazy idea, Theo said, picking up his sandwich again. Instead of treating this like a science experiment, ask her out. Properly. Stop playing detective and just get to know her. Callan hesitated. Theo pointed a finger at him. See? You like her. You just don't want to admit it. Callan opened his mouth, then closed it. I knew it, Theo said triumphantly. Go on a real date. Maybe then you'll realize she's just a normal woman and not some elaborate mystery for you to solve. Callan frowned. That was the problem. Keris Vale was not normal. And he was going to find out why. Across the city, in a sleek high-rise that appeared from the outside to be just another corporate office, 5 figures sat in silent deliberation. The observation chamber was lined with mirrored windows, transparent from the inside, but reflective from without. The space was stark, furnished only with a crescent-shaped table and a series of floating holographic displays. At the head of the table, Sarin Varen paced, his hands clasped behind his back. His human disguise was deactivated, revealing violet-hued skin, elongated facial features, and piercing silver eyes. The Keris Vale situation requires immediate intervention, he said sharply, his tone edged with irritation. She is becoming too integrated with human society. Councillor Malin Syros, seated at the center of the table, steepled his fingers. His gaze, golden and unblinking, was impassive. And what exactly do you mean by too integrated? Sarin tapped a floating screen, bringing up surveillance footage. The holographic projection played back the moment from last night. Keris standing with Callan beneath the street lamp, their conversation captured in near perfect clarity. She is forming an attachment to this human. A scientist, no less. Another counselor, a woman with deep indigo markings across her features, leaned forward. Attachments are not prohibited. This is different. Sarin's violet skin darkened slightly, a sign of frustration. I have reviewed the surveillance. She is deviating from established protocols. She is becoming careless. Malin narrowed his eyes. You mean she is revealing too much of herself? Not our existence. Sarin's jaw tightened. Prevention is better than reaction. I propose a controlled test. The room went silent. A test? Malin asked slowly. A controlled revelation, Sarin clarified. A targeted electromagnetic pulse will temporarily disable her holographic disguise. If this human sees her true form, we activate the revelation protocol. Her response will determine her loyalty. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. That is a dangerous proposition, another counselor said. The revelation protocol exists to protect our society when accidents occur, not as a tool for manipulation. I remind the council, Sarin said, voice measured. that Keris Vale is not just any operative. She is heir to House Vale. Her actions reflect on us all. Malin considered him carefully. And what if the human does not see anything? Then the matter is closed, Saren said smoothly. No further action required. A long pause. Finally, Malin spoke. The vote stands at 3 in favor, 2 against. His golden eyes flicked toward the indigo-marked counselor. Your decision will determine our course. She hesitated. Her expression remained unreadable. Then, finally, she nodded. Proceed. But with minimal disruption. Saren smiled. Of course, counselor. Minimal disruption is all I seek. That evening, Callan stood outside Keris' door, gripping a bottle of wine in his hand. Liquid courage, he told himself. She opened the door within seconds, her sharp golden-brown eyes locking onto his immediately. You remembered, she said, her lips curving into a smile. You made me promise, he replied, stepping inside. Her apartment was a study in contradictions. Minimalist furniture, but intricate artwork that seemed to shift depending on the angle. The air carried a scent that was neither floral nor spicy, but something elemental. He handed her the wine. Their fingers brushed, and again, he noticed it, her subtle flinch. Odd. Make yourself comfortable, she said, heading toward the kitchen. I'll open this. Callan sat on the sofa, eyes tracing the artwork. Tell me about your day. Any breakthroughs? Just the usual, he said, failing repeatedly until something works. You. She reappeared, 2 glasses in hand. Cultural liaison work keeps me busy. Cultural liaison. He took the glass. Between who? A fractional hesitation. Foreign clients looking to understand American markets. That explained nothing. She sat beside him, close enough that he could detect the faint warmth of her skin. You notice things, Callan, she said suddenly, her eyes locked on his. The room felt smaller. Yes, he admitted. Her gaze sharpened. Do you like knowing the answers? His pulse ticked up. Yes. She studied him, as if weighing something. Then, suddenly, the lights flickered, then went out. Darkness. A single pulse of blue-white energy erupted from where Keris sat, illuminating the space in an eerie glow. Callan's breath caught. Something was very, very wrong. Darkness swallowed the room. For a fraction of a second, the only sound was the quiet hum of the city outside, the muffled noise of distant traffic. Then came the sharp crackle of static, like an electrical charge diffusing into the air. Callan's breath caught as his pupils struggled to adjust. A flash of blue-white light erupted from where Keris sat, illuminating the space for an instant before vanishing just as quickly. The afterimage burned into his vision, her silhouette outlined in something unnatural, something almost inhuman. The hairs on his arms stood on end. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Power outage, he asked, forcing his voice to sound steady. Keris didn't answer immediately. In the darkness, he could only hear her controlled breathing, the faintest rustle of movement. No, she finally said, her voice tighter than he'd ever heard it. Something's wrong. Then, sharper, don't move. Something about her tone sent a chill down his spine. It was commanding, almost fearful, but not for herself. For him. His muscles locked instinctively, but his mind rebelled. A faint glow flickered to life, soft, pulsing blue light radiating from the direction where Keris had been sitting. The kind of glow that wasn't coming from a phone or emergency backup lighting. No, this was coming from her. His breath hitched. The light slowly brightened, like a veil lifting, revealing. Callan's entire body went rigid. Keris Vale was not human. Her form was shifting before his eyes, like a mirage dissolving into its true state. The flawless skin he had thought was merely unblemished now shimmered with a faint violet hue. Her hair, which had once been deep brown, had transformed into a cascade of metallic silver strands, reflecting the dim light like liquid mercury. And her eyes, golden, luminous, slit-pupiled like some predatory cat, were locked onto him, filled with something that looked unsettlingly close to fear. His breath came fast and shallow. What are you? Keris's hands clenched at her sides, her jaw tightening. The lights flickered back on, flooding the room with harsh artificial brightness. The holographic disguise didn't reactivate. She remained as she was. Exposed. Callan shot up from the couch, knocking over his glass. It hit the floor with a dull thud, rolling on its side. Keris lifted a hand. Wait. He stumbled backward. Wait? You want me to wait? His voice cracked with disbelief. He pointed at her, at the impossible transformation in front of him. What the hell? You're not human. No, I'm not, she said, her voice softer now. She didn't move toward him, didn't try to close the space between them. She just stood there, watching him carefully, gauging his reaction. And you were never supposed to see this. Callan's thoughts scrambled for logic, for rationality. The scientific part of his brain was firing on all cylinders, demanding explanations. His neighbor, his perfect neighbor, was not human. Not just odd, not just suspicious, an entirely different species. Your skin, your eyes, he swallowed. It's some kind of advanced tech? A disguise? Keris nodded slowly. A holographic veil. It was supposed to be foolproof. Her golden eyes flickered with something unreadable. Someone just disabled it. Callan's stomach twisted. Someone else. I didn't do this, she said. This was a targeted disruption. Which means, she hesitated. I think I'm being watched. Callan let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You think you're being watched? He gestured wildly. I just found out my neighbor is an alien, and you're the one feeling paranoid. Keris exhaled sharply. I know this is a lot, Callan, but you need to listen to me. He took another step back, hitting the edge of the coffee table. No, I need answers. His mind was still spinning, grasping at possibilities. Are you some kind of government experiment? An AI? I am not artificial, she said, a little too quickly. I am very much alive. Then what? He demanded. Keris hesitated. Then, as if coming to a decision, she straightened. My name is Keris Vale. But that's not my real name. I am Keris Valkai of the Elendari. My people have been living on Earth for centuries. His breath caught in his throat. Your people, he echoed. She nodded. We exist among you. Hidden. Watching. Something cold and primal settled in Callan's gut. Why? She hesitated again, but before she could answer, a new sound cut through the room. A chime. Subtle, but insistent. Keris flinched and reached for the sleek device on her wrist. A holographic interface flickered to life, displaying a string of symbols Callan didn't recognize. Her expression hardened. They are here. A sharp knock echoed at the door. Callan felt his blood run cold. Keris turned to him, her voice urgent. You need to trust me right now. Another knock, this time firmer. Keris Vale. A voice called from the other side. Male. Calm. But there was something about it that sent shivers down Callan's spine. She tensed. Callan looked from her to the door, pulse pounding. Who is that? The council, she whispered. The what? She turned to him, stepping closer. Callan, I need you to do exactly as I say. His breathing was shallow. I don't even know what's happening. If you want to live through tonight, she interrupted, her golden eyes burning into his, you will listen to me. A pause. Callan's throat was dry. Then he nodded. Keris exhaled, visibly relieved. Stay behind me. Don't speak unless I tell you to. The knock came again. This time, the voice was sharper. Keris Valkai, we know you're in there. Open the door. Now. She pressed a button on her wrist device, and a hidden panel in the floor slid open. Callan barely had time to react before she grabbed his arm and pulled him into the concealed compartment. The last thing he saw before the panel sealed shut was the door unlocking on its own, and the shadows of two figures stepping inside. The space beneath her apartment was barely wide enough for them to crouch. Callan's heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to process everything. Above them, muffled voices. "Where is he?" Keris tensed. One of the voices let out a slow sigh. "Keris, this is disappointing. You know the rules." Silence. Then, footsteps. Someone was searching the apartment. A shadow passed over the hidden panel above them. Callan's breath stalled in his throat. He turned his head slightly toward Keris, trying to keep his movements minimal. "What do they want?" he mouthed. She shook her head. The silence stretched. Then, finally, a new voice. Female. Cold. "If you're protecting him, you know what comes next." Keris inhaled sharply. Callan saw something flicker across her face. Something he hadn't expected. Fear. Then the footsteps retreated. A moment later, the door closed. They were gone. Keris pressed a button, and the panel above them slid open again. Callan climbed out first, his body still tense, his heart still hammering. Keris stood beside him, her expression unreadable. He swallowed hard. "What comes next?" he asked. Keris met his gaze. Her voice was quiet. "They'll force me to choose." Callan's pulse pounded in his ears. The apartment was silent, but it wasn't empty. They had left, but not permanently. He could feel it. Keris stood beside him, staring at the door as if she expected it to swing open at any moment. Her silver hair shimmered under the artificial light, her golden eyes unreadable. Callan swallowed hard, the weight of the last few minutes pressing down on him like a physical force. "They'll force you to choose?" he repeated, voice hoarse. She turned to face him, and for the first time, he saw something beyond her perfect control, uncertainty. "Yes." "What does that mean?" he demanded. "Choose what?" Keris exhaled, folding her arms as she stepped away, pacing the room. In Elendari law, there are only two outcomes when a human learns of us. She stopped, locking eyes with him. "Either I erase you from existence, or we bond." Callan's throat tightened. Bond. The word held weight, something heavier than the casual implication of human relationships. "Bond," he echoed, hesitant. "What does that?" "It's not marriage, Callan," she interrupted, shaking her head. "It's not a relationship in the way you understand it." She exhaled, struggling to find words. "It's biological. Permanent." He went still. Permanent. He forced himself to ask. "And if I refuse?" She hesitated, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "Then the council will erase you." The words landed like a gut punch. Erase. Not kill. Not imprison. They would erase him. He didn't know which was worse. Callan ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts spiraling. He had come here for a casual night. A drink, conversation, maybe a step towards something normal. Now he was standing in his neighbor's apartment, being told he had two choices: become something else or vanish from the world completely. Keris watched him carefully, her expression guarded. She was giving him space, letting him process, but there was something else in her gaze. Guilt. She hadn't planned for this. He exhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. "I don't," he shook his head. "This isn't fair," she finished softly. He let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, something like that." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "It's not fair for me either." He frowned. "I wasn't supposed to reveal myself," she continued. "I was supposed to live my life here, blend in. I was supposed to exist in peace." Callan studied her. For the first time since this all started, he wondered what her life had been like before tonight. Had she always been living under this weight? Hiding? Waiting for a moment like this to happen? "Is that what you want?" he asked. She blinked at him. "What?" "To exist in peace," he said, searching her expression. "Do you want to be here? Or is this just a mission for you?" Her lips parted slightly as if the question had caught her off guard. A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, she spoke. "I chose this," she said quietly. I chose Earth. The words carried weight, more than he expected. He swallowed. Why? Keris hesitated, then looked away. There are things about my people that you wouldn't understand, she said finally. Laws. Expectations. The Elendari are not like humans. We don't value individualism the way you do. Everything is about duty. Callan listened, saying nothing. My family, they're one of the ruling houses. My entire life, I was trained to take my place in the political structure, to serve the council, to be exactly what they wanted me to be. She exhaled, shaking her head. I never wanted that. So I left. I came here. To be free. To be myself. Her golden eyes met his again, and for the first time, Callan saw her not as something alien, but as someone who had spent her life running from expectations. The weight of her choices pressed down on him, mixing with his own. He could see it now, the thin thread of connection between them. She had been forced to choose once before. Now, so was he. The realization sent a shiver through him. What happens if we bond? He asked, his voice quieter now. Keris studied him. Our minds synchronize. Biologically, we become linked. Your body would begin adapting to Elendari physiology. Your lifespan would extend. You would, she hesitated. You would change. Callan exhaled. And if I say no? A shadow passed over her expression. I would be forced to turn you over to the council, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. And they would erase you. A cold silence filled the room. Callan clenched his fists. This wasn't a choice. Not really. Be erased or become something else entirely. But then, wasn't his life already nothing? He had no family, no attachments outside of work, no grand ambitions beyond his research. What was he really losing? His humanity? Maybe. But in exchange for what? For something more? He met her gaze, heart hammering. If I say yes, he said slowly, then what? A flicker of something crossed her face. Relief? Surprise? She stepped closer. Then we complete the process. Tonight. Callan swallowed. And after that? She studied him carefully. Then we face the council. Together. He exhaled sharply, glancing at the door. They'll come back, won't they? Yes. And if we're bonded? They can't touch you. He turned back to her. Her golden eyes burned into his. This was it. No going back. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Then he nodded. I trust you. Something in Keris's posture relaxed. She lifted her hand, palm up. Then take my hand, she said softly. Callan hesitated for only a moment. Then, slowly, he reached out. Their fingers touched. The moment they did, a surge of energy passed between them, like static electricity, but deeper, richer, something alive. A connection formed, something invisible yet undeniable. Images flashed in his mind. Stars. Cities made of light. A planet that wasn't Earth. Keris's memories. And then, a pulse of warmth flooded his veins, spreading through his entire body. He gasped, his vision momentarily blurring. Keris was watching him carefully, her grip steady. It's happening, she whispered. Callan's knees buckled slightly, but she caught him, steadying him. His skin tingled. His heartbeat slowed, then quickened in a different rhythm. The bond was real. When he opened his eyes again, he felt it. Her presence. Not just physically, inside him. Like a second heartbeat. Like a tether between them. Keris exhaled, closing her eyes briefly before opening them again. It's done. Callan swallowed, adjusting to the strange sensation thrumming in his blood. Now what? A knock at the door. The council had returned. Keris straightened, her expression unreadable once more. But this time, there was something else behind her golden gaze. Strength. She turned to Callan, her voice calm, steady. Now, she said, we fight.